Good day, dear friends. Welcome to another episode of the Culinary Masterclass supported by La Fondation pour la Formation Hôtelière. Today we will focus on chicken meat, i.e. parts of chicken meat, how to cut a chicken into smaller pieces, what are the pieces, what types of dishes can be prepared from individual pieces of chicken, and how to separate the meat from the bones. Here we have a whole chicken. To process the chicken, we use this knife with a short and strong blade. This knife is easy to manipulate and we can easily process the meat and, if necessary, we can separate the meat from the bones. First, we will separate the wings from the chicken. We lift the wing a little and cut it slightly. We look for the part of the cartilage that connects the wing to the rest of the carcass. When we have found that part, we cut the cartilage and separate the wing from the carcass. So we always look for the cartilage and separate the wing from the carcass there. There is no need for any force or strength. Now we will separate the second wing in the same way, pull it, make a small cut and cut where it connects to the cartilage. See how simple it is, we never cut across the bone but where it connects to the cartilage. When we have separated the wing, we also cut off this tip of the wing. We also separate the cartilage part, we cut there so as not to cut across the bone. It actually does not have a big and important role in gastronomy, so I separate it and use it to prepare stock or soup. Now we're going to separate the drumstick from the carcass. We're holding the drumstick, we're going to cut it slightly to cut through the skin and we're going to cut through the meat a little bit, follow that natural part where the drumstick separates and to make it easier, pull it a little, pull it freely, cut the meat a little more on the side and fold it over. We're just folding it over so that the bone pops out at the cartilage and then we're going to cut through the cartilage and separate the drumstick from the carcass. We're going to separate the other drumstick in the same way. We're going to pull it a little, cut through the membranes, pull it over, fold it over and cut through the cartilage. Let me repeat, we never cut through the bones, but between the cartilage. We've separated both drumsticks. Now we're going to separate the breast. We can separate the breast with or without the skin. I will now separate this skin so that you can more easily see where I'm going to cut. We can use the skin to prepare the soup, to make it fatter, or if you want, you can put parchment paper on the baking sheet, then fold the skin nicely, season it a little, press it, cover it with greaseproof paper and press it down with something heavier. Then you bake it at 180 degrees Celsius for a few minutes until it turns brown and you get chicken skin chips that you can use as an edible decoration in a dish made from chicken breast. We will now leave the skin for further use. Follow this breast bone and gently, with the tip of the knife, cut right next to the bone, little by little, cut and slowly separate the meat from the bones. I repeat, we always cut a little at a time with the tip of the knife, going along the bone and separating the breast so that as little meat as possible remains on the bones. Separate the veins and fat from the breast. We will do the same with the other breast, turn it to make it easier for us, and gently use the tip of the knife to cut little by little along the bone until we completely separate the meat from the bones. It might be a little harder at first until you get used to it, but it doesn't matter, practice makes perfect. In the beginning, there may be a little more meat left on the bones, but that's not a problem either, you'll use those bones to prepare the stock, so in any case, use everything. Cut the membrane off, break it and separate the bone into two parts, which you can then use in further preparation of some dishes. These skeletons, which have little meat and fat and a lot of bones, are used to prepare stock, soups, stews. This will give a great meaty flavor to our stock. Then we have chicken breasts, and we can use them in so many ways. We can prepare some schnitzels, we can stuff them, we can bread them, we can wrap them in bacon and chop them, we can cut them into strips and prepare some sautés, we can make skewers out of them, we can prepare them in some sauce, we can make nuggetsy. There are really many ways to prepare chicken breasts. Then we have chicken drumsticks with drumsticks, we can prepare them in many ways, we can bake them whole, we can bread them, we can prepare them in some sauce, we can smoke them. We can separate the drumsticks in half, we also cut between the cartilage, never over the bone but over the cartilage. We can also make some chicken stew or drumsticks in some sauce. We can separate the drumstick meat from the bone and then grill it or stuff it and roll it up. Here's how we're going to separate the bones from the drumsticks. We cut lightly with the tip of the knife little by little, we feel with the tip of our fingers where the bone goes, and then the tip of the knife follows the bone, little by little, and we go along the bone to slowly separate the meat from the bone. That's why we need to use this knife with a short blade to be able to easily manipulate and follow the bone. We cut slowly until we separate the entire bone from the meat. At the beginning this will be a difficult process, but slowly, practice, and over time it will become easier and lighter and less meat will remain on the bones. Let's separate this small part of the cartilage that is left on the meat, then sear the meat a little to flatten it, so that it is of equal thickness so that it can be heat treated equally. Leave the bones and use them to prepare the stock. We can use the wings for baking, frying, preparing on the grill, frying, preparing in a sauce. You can also cut the wings in half, then they will be even easier to process. I usually cut them in half, right at the cartilage, and then prepare them fried with a sweet and spicy sauce. That's it, we have separated all the parts of the chicken meat, and now you know which part you can use for which dish. This is really not complicated, it requires a little effort and practice, but we believe that you will master this quickly and easily. Enjoy cooking. Now I will show you how to cut steaks, what you should pay attention to when cutting steaks, how to cut them to be as beautiful and high quality as possible, and all those details that maybe even butchers will not pay attention to. Here we have a nice pork ham, from the back leg. The part of meat is part of the leg and belongs to the first category of meat. It is one of the best quality parts of the meat, and it is the most often cut and prepared into steaks. Tay part of meat has another part on it called the lid. It is about 1 centimeter thick, but the butchers have already separated that part. Now it is necessary to process the meat a little, that is, to clean it from the membrane and fat. That is easy, we just gently separate the fat from the meat. Of course we use the sharpest knife possible. As much as this may seem unnecessary to do, my advice is to always process the meat nicely because the steak will be of top quality at the end. All that we have separated, membranes and fat, we save it all and can use it for grinding and later minced meat for the preparation of a dish. So everything we separate can be ground or cut and used in that way, so don't be afraid if you cut a little more meat. Now that we have processed the meat nicely and cleaned it of fat and veins, we will now cut our steaks. What should we pay attention to when cutting meat? Every meat consists of fibers, muscle fibers, and before cutting the meat we need to see their direction. Here, imagine that my fingers are muscle fibers. If we cut the meat lengthwise, following those fibers, then those fibers will shrink during heat treatment and the meat will be tougher. If we cut the fibers across, then they don't have much space to gather and the meat will be much less tough, and much tastier. So if we cut the steak across the fibers instead of along the fibers, we can get a steak from the same part of the meat that will be 15 to 20% less tough and therefore tastier and softer. That is why it is necessary to remember and apply this, and many butchers do not know about this because they deal with meat processing and are less dedicated to heat processing of meat. Here the muscle fibers are clearly visible and they go in this direction. And if I were to cut the steak this way now, we would get a steak that is 15 to 20% tougher than if we cut it in this direction. Now we will start cutting the steak. Since this part is not flat, we will cut a little and flatten it. We can cut this part into noodles and use it to prepare a dish as desired. And now we got a nice shape of meat that we will use for cutting steaks. Cut the meat about 1 centimeter thick and cut almost to the very end, but leave a few millimeters before the end so that it is not cut, then cut the same thickness again but to the very end. Basically we want to get like a double steak or a steak that we can fold like a butterfly wing. We do this in order to get a steak with a larger surface that we can easily grill and prepare. If we were to cut only one thicker piece, then it would be a narrow and thick steak. It would be more of a steak than a steak. The steak should be thinner, somewhere around half a centimeter thick and with a larger surface, so we cut it so that it folds like a book leaf or a butterfly wing, as I often like to say. The size of the schnitzel depends on the standards of the restaurant and can be between 180 and 250 grams. You play with the weight, you decide how thick and big the steak will be. To repeat once again, we do not cut along the fibers but look to cut the fibers so that they shrink less. When cutting the steaks, we use a knife with a larger and longer blade, which is of course sharp, and gently pull back and forth in an even stroke so that the blade gently passes through the meat. We cut as much as we can, depending on the size of the meat, and we can use these remaining ends for some sauté, skewers, stew or something similar. We cut 4 to 5 steaks and now we can prepare them in various ways. We can fry them, stuff them, fry them, prepare them in a sauce or according to any recipe we want. You have now seen what you should pay attention to when cutting steaks, how to cut steaks very simply, easily and professionally. Try, cut, make mistakes and you will learn over time. This way, over time, you will be able to cut better than a butcher and will adapt the steaks to your needs and the dish you plan to prepare. Practice makes perfect. Thank you for your attention, enjoy and cook. Until the next video, goodbye.